The conference room went quiet when my boss cleared his throat. He didn't look at me. He looked at everyone else. Then he said my name. He said my position was being terminated, effective immediately. Just like that, in front of my whole team. People stopped typing. Someone actually gasped. I sat there, still holding my coffee, trying to process what he'd just said. Because an hour earlier, Payroll had sent me a message confirming my contract renewal. I wasn't fired, not legally. And the worst part? He had no idea I had that email open on my laptop right in front of me. Monday mornings in the operations department were usually loud. Chairs scraping, coffee lids popping open, half-whispered complaints about deadlines, the hum of people logging into systems that never loaded fast enough. But this Monday felt different before anyone said a word. No one had been given an agenda. The calendar invite had simply said department alignment meeting mandatory attendance. Mandatory always meant trouble. Ethan arrived on time, laptop bag over one shoulder, travel mug still warm in his hand. He had been with the company for 7 years, long enough to know when tension was floating in the air like static before a storm. He chose a seat near the end of the table, close to the window. Habit. He liked having a view of the parking lot. Something steady to look at when meetings dragged on. He opened his laptop. Inbox. Unread messages. At the top sat an email he had not fully processed yet. Payroll confirmation. Contract renewal processed. Effective immediately. He had read it twice earlier that morning. His renewal had come through ahead of schedule. That usually meant good internal standing, stable position, continued trust. He had planned to speak to his supervisor later that week about the new compensation bracket. Now, he just let the email sit there on the screen. Across the room, people spoke in low voices. Someone joked about layoffs in another department. Someone else said leadership had been acting strange lately. Then the door opened. The room went quiet in a way that did not feel natural. Mr. Dalton walked in. Regional Director. A man who never attended routine operations meetings. He did not smile. He did not greet anyone. He stood at the head of the table instead of sitting. Behind him stood someone from Human Resources holding a thin folder. That was when the tension sharpened. Ethan felt it in his chest. Not panic, something colder, instinct. Dalton rested his hands on the back of a chair and scanned the room. "We will keep this brief." His voice was flat, detached, like he was reading off a checklist. He looked down at a paper in his hand. Then he said Ethan's name. Several heads turned. Ethan looked up slowly. Dalton continued speaking without making eye contact. Due to performance concerns and restructuring decisions, Ethan's position is being terminated effective immediately. The words dropped into the room and seemed to suck all sound out with them. No warning, no prior discussion, no private conversation, just a public ending delivered like a routine update. Someone near the front stopped typing. A chair creaked as someone shifted uncomfortably. Ethan felt his ears ring, but his face stayed calm, still. His mind moved faster than his body. Performance concerns. That was not real. His last review had been above expectations. His metrics were clean. His team relied on him for system knowledge no one else had. He looked down at his laptop. The payroll email glowed on the screen. Contract renewal processed. Effective immediately. Still active. He read it again. Slower. He was not terminated in the system. Legally, he was still employed. Dalton continued talking about workload redistribution and transition planning as if Ethan were a broken printer being removed from inventory. HR stepped forward slightly, ready to begin the exit procedure. That was when Ethan stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every eye in the room followed him now. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply turned his laptop so the screen faced the front of the room. Payroll confirmation. Timestamp from less than 2 hours ago. He spoke evenly. My contract was renewed this morning. Silence. Dalton frowned, irritation flashing across his face. HR moved closer. We should discuss this privately, but several people had already seen the screen. And once doubt enters a room, authority starts to leak. Ethan closed the laptop gently. He did not wait to be escorted. He walked out on his own. Behind him, the meeting did not resume, because everyone in that room understood one thing Dalton did not yet grasp. This was not a clean termination. This was a public mistake, and public mistakes inside corporations do not stay small. They spread. The hallway outside the conference room felt too bright. Ethan walked without rushing, but his pulse thudded steadily in his ears. Every step felt unreal, like he had walked into someone else's life for a moment. Behind him, the conference room door opened. HR followed. Her name was Melissa, mid-40s, professional smile that never reached her eyes. She had handled onboarding when Ethan first joined the company. Back then, she had seemed warm. Today, her expression was tight. "Let's step into a smaller room and sort this out," she said. "Sort this out." Corporate language for damage control. They entered a glass-walled meeting pod near the break area. She closed the door gently, as if loud sounds might make the situation worse. "You shouldn't have brought that up in the meeting," she said quietly. Ethan looked at her without hostility. "You shouldn't have fired someone who is still on payroll." She inhaled slowly through her nose. The professional mask stayed in place, but tension showed at the edges. "May I see the email?" He opened his laptop again and turned it toward her. Payroll services subject contract renewal confirmation. Timestamp 8:12 a.m. She read every line. Twice. Her posture changed, shoulders tighter, jaw set. "I need to confirm something." She stepped outside with her phone pressed to her ear. Through the glass, Ethan could see people pretending not to watch. Coworkers passing by slowed down. A few glanced toward the conference room, then toward him. Humiliation spreads faster than announcements. He turned back to his screen. The renewal email was legitimate. Internal headers matched. HRIS system stamp at the bottom. He had worked in operations long enough to recognize official formatting. Another notification appeared. System access modification. His permissions were being reduced, not removed, reduced. That meant IT had received a request to limit access, not terminate employment, which meant HR and management were scrambling in real time. Melissa returned, phone still in hand. "Payroll confirms your renewal processed this morning." She chose each word carefully. "So, I am still employed." "Technically, yes. Technically." The word hung in the air like a warning. "But your employment status is under review." Under review was a worse than fired. It meant they had not decided how to fix the mistake yet. "I was publicly terminated in front of my team," Ethan said calmly. She nodded once. "Yes." Not, "I'm sorry," not that shouldn't have happened, just yes. "I need to escalate this to legal." That word changed everything. HR handles policies, legal handles risk. And once lawyers enter the picture, companies stop thinking about pride and start thinking about exposure. Melissa stepped out again. Ethan sat back in the chair. He replayed the meeting. Dalton never cited documentation, never mentioned a performance review, never referenced a warning. Just a public decision delivered like a final verdict, which meant it was personal, or rushed, or both. His inbox pinged again. Internal chat message from Maya in accounting. "Are you okay?" he replied. "Still employed." A pause. Then she wrote. "Wait, what?" He attached a screenshot of the payroll email. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Oh my God. The door to the pod was slightly open now. He could hear fragments of Melissa's conversation in the hallway. Compliance legal documentation. Each word tightened the situation for management. Because public termination without documentation is not just embarrassing, it is liability, especially if the employee can prove retaliation or reputational harm. Melissa returned. Expression more serious now. Legal wants to meet with you tomorrow morning, not HR. Legal. He nodded. Do I need to sign anything? No, not yet. She hesitated. It would help if we could resolve this quietly. Quietly. Quietly means no written record. Quietly means no admission. Quietly means the company protects itself, not the employee. Ethan closed his laptop. I was terminated publicly. Quiet ended in that room. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Understood. For now, please return to your desk. Continue your normal duties. That was the shift. An hour ago, he was escorted out. Now, he was reinstated. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. As Ethan walked back toward his department, people pretended to work but watched him from the corners of their eyes. The story was already moving through the building. He had been fired. Then he had not. And when truth and authority collide inside an office, authority rarely comes out clean. Tomorrow, lawyers would get involved. And once lawyers start asking questions, careers change direction. Sometimes permanently. When Ethan stepped back onto the operations floor, the sound level dropped for half a second. Not silence, but that subtle dip in noise that happens when people try not to stare at someone who just became the center of a story. He walked at a normal pace, sat at his desk, logged back into his system. His access still worked. That alone told a story. If he had truly been terminated, his credentials would have been dead before he reached the elevator. Across the aisle, Maya from accounting stood up with a coffee cup in her hand. She hesitated, then walked over. Her voice was low. Are you okay? Ethan nodded. Still employed, she blinked. What do you mean? He turned his monitor slightly, just enough for her to see the payroll email header. Her eyebrows lifted, but he just said, I know. She looked back toward the conference room hallway. You want me to pretend I didn't see that? No. She gave a short breath that was almost a laugh, but not from humor. Okay. That word carried weight, because Maya had been in the meeting. She had heard Dalton announce the termination. She had seen HR standing there like silent enforcement. Now, she'd seen proof that the system said otherwise. She was a witness to contradiction. 2 rows down, Chris from logistics rolled his chair closer. Word travels fast in open offices. You're still here, he said. Yep, they mess up your paperwork or something like that. Chris glanced around before lowering his voice. He shouldn't have said that in front of everyone. Ethan looked at him carefully. You remember exactly what he said. Chris nodded slowly. Performance issues, immediate termination, restructuring. He rubbed his chin. He didn't mention any warnings or documentation. No, that mattered, because witnesses do not just confirm what happened. They confirm what did not happen. No warning, no review discussion, no written reference. Public humiliation without process. By lunchtime, half the floor knew the situation did not line up. Some people avoided Ethan, worried about being pulled into drama. Others quietly showed support in small ways. A message in chat, a nod in the hallway, an offer to talk later. Then something else happened. Sandra from HR Analytics stopped by his desk. She never left her department unless something was serious. I heard there's a status issue with your termination. Status issue. Corporate code for mistake. I just need to confirm something. Your last performance review was it marked satisfactory, above. She nodded. That's what I thought. She lowered her voice further. There's no performance documentation in your file supporting immediate termination. That sentence alone was dangerous, because once the lack of documentation becomes known, the issue stops being managerial. it becomes legal exposure. Sandra walked away quickly, but not before saying one more thing. If legal asks, be clear and factual. Legal. The word was spreading now. Mid-afternoon, an email appeared from IT. Your account access level has been restored to standard operations role. Restored. Meaning it had been reduced earlier. Meaning someone had tried to quietly sideline him before the situation stabilized. People notice system changes. IT logs everything, which means there was now a digital trail showing management acted before verifying employment status. Digital trails become evidence. Around 3 o'clock, Melissa from HR walked through the department with someone new. A woman in a gray suit with a temporary badge clipped to her jacket. Corporate counsel, lawyer. She did not speak to Ethan, but she walked straight into Dalton's office. The door closed. 30 minutes later, she walked into the conference room. The same room where the termination had happened. She asked facilities for access to the meeting recording, because leadership meetings in that room were automatically archived. Dalton had forgotten that, or assumed no one would check. But once legal is involved, they check everything. A meeting recording does not just capture words. It captures tone, facial expressions, absence of evidence. It shows whether a decision was structured or impulsive. That recording now existed as a time-stamped piece of corporate history. Ethan's name attached. Public termination without documented basis. By late afternoon, Dalton had not left his office. The usual loud phone calls were gone. No confident stride through the hallway, no visible authority. When leadership stops moving, people notice, because power inside offices is measured by motion. And Dalton had gone still. Ethan packed up at the end of the day with careful calm. He was not angry. Anger clouds judgment. He was focused, because now this was not about embarrassment. It was about record, witnesses, digital trails, and a meeting recording that could not be edited. The situation had crossed a line. From internal management mistake to potential corporate liability. And once a company starts worrying about liability, the people who cause the risk stop being protected. They start being evaluated, sometimes replaced. Tomorrow, he would meet legal. And for the first time since the meeting, Ethan realized something important. He was no longer the person in danger. Dalton was. By the next morning, the building felt different. News had spread beyond Ethan's department. Not officially, never officially, but offices run on quiet networks of observation, and a public termination that unraveled in real time was too unusual to stay contained. When Ethan stepped out of the elevator, 2 people from marketing stopped talking mid-sentence. Someone else quickly looked at their monitor as if work had suddenly become urgent. At 9:15, Melissa from HR appeared at his desk. Her smile was back, but it looked forced now, like a bandage over a crack. Legal would like to meet at 10, she said. Conference room C, neutral ground. Small enough to feel private, large enough to feel formal. When Ethan entered, the gray-suited woman from the previous day was already seated at the table. A legal pad in front of her. Pen aligned perfectly parallel to the page. She introduced herself as Rebecca from corporate counsel. Her tone was calm, controlled, not friendly, not hostile. Professional in the way surgeons are professional. Melissa sat beside her but did not speak. Rebecca folded her hands. We are here to understand exactly what occurred yesterday. Ethan nodded. He spoke carefully, no exaggeration, no emotion, just sequence. Dalton announced termination in front of full department. Cited performance concerns. No prior warning. No documentation referenced. HR present. Security mentioned. Then he described the payroll email. Timestamp, contract renewal, system still active. Rebecca wrote everything down. She asked one question. Did Mr. Dalton ever previously indicate performance dissatisfaction to you directly? No. Any written warning? No. Any improvement plan? No. She made a small mark beside her notes. That mark meant something. Melissa shifted slightly in her chair but stayed silent. Rebecca then asked, 2 weeks ago, did you have any disagreement with Mr. Dalton regarding a compliance report? The air in the room changed. Ethan answered, yes. She looked up. Explain. He described the quarterly operations compliance summary. Dalton wanted numbers adjusted to show faster processing times. Ethan refused, said the data would not support it, sent the original figures. Rebecca did not react outwardly, but she wrote much more this time. After the meeting, Melissa walked Ethan out into the hallway. Her voice dropped. We want to resolve this constructively. Constructively, that word meant settlement, prevention, containment. How? She hesitated. There may be an opportunity to adjust reporting lines, offer a role change, compensation consideration. Role change was a corporate language for move him quietly. Compensation consideration was money. Money is the first tool companies reach for when they want silence without admitting fault. Ethan stopped walking. I was publicly terminated. She nodded. We understand. Then it should be corrected publicly. She looked away for a moment. That may not be possible in the same format. It had to be. Because humiliation in public damages reputation in public, private fixes do not erase public damage. Rebecca stepped out of the conference room behind them. She spoke directly, voice calm. He is correct. Melissa froze. Rebecca continued. If the company does not correct the record in front of the same group, the reputational harm remains documented. That was not sympathy. That was risk assessment. Rebecca turned to Ethan. We will be reviewing meeting recordings and internal communications. Please do not discuss legal details with co-workers. Standard instruction. He nodded. But the damage had already been witnessed. You cannot unsee a public firing. You cannot unhear it, even if emails later claim confusion. That afternoon, an unusual calendar invite appeared across multiple departments. Leadership alignment update mandatory attendance. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. Something had gone wrong at the top. And when leadership calls an all hands without slides, it is never good news for someone. Dalton did not appear on the attendee list. By 3 o'clock, his office blinds were closed. At 4:30, IT remotely disabled his executive admin access. That action did not go unnoticed. Assistants talk, admins notice, access logs travel. The shift had begun. The company was no longer trying to remove Ethan quietly. They were trying to contain Dalton. And once a corporation pivots from protecting a director to investigating him, outcomes change quickly. Ethan left work that evening with a strange sense of calm. He had walked in 2 days ago as a mid-level operations employee. He walked out now as the center of a corporate legal review. He did not feel powerful. He felt steady, because the truth was no longer just in his inbox. It was in recordings, in system logs, in witnesses, and, most importantly, in the hands of lawyers who worked for the company. Not for Dalton. The recording was not dramatic. No shouting, no slammed fists, no open hostility. That was what made it dangerous. Corporate investigations rarely hinge on explosions. They hinge on calm statements made without evidence. Rebecca from legal watched the footage alone first, then with HR, then once more with a compliance officer. Each viewing slowed down, paused, rewound. Dalton standing at the head of the table, hands resting on a chair, reading from a sheet of paper, his voice measured, controlled. Due to performance concerns and restructuring decisions, Ethan's position is being terminated effective immediately. No mention of documentation. No reference to a performance review, no timeline. Just a statement presented as a final fact. Then came the part that mattered most. Rebecca paused the video, zoomed slightly. Dalton's eyes never met Ethan's. He spoke to the room, not the person. That mattered legally, because it showed the purpose was not discussion. It was announcement, public, final, reputational. She let the video continue. HR standing near the wall. Silent. No attempt to interrupt, no suggestion of a private conversation. Then Ethan turning his laptop. The screen not fully visible on recording, but his words clear. My contract was renewed this morning. Dalton's reaction slowed the footage. A brief tightening of the jaw. Irritation, not surprise. Rebecca wrote something down. If Dalton had not known, his first response would have been confusion, not annoyance. The video ended with Ethan leaving under his own power, not escorted. That detail mattered too. Security had been mentioned but never activated, which meant the termination procedure had not actually begun, just announced. Rebecca closed her notebook. This was not a documentation error. This was an impulsive decision presented as official action. Later that afternoon, she requested internal email logs. Specifically, any communication between Dalton and HR in the 48 hours before the meeting. What she found tightened the situation. Dalton had sent a short message the previous evening. Need Ethan off the team tomorrow. Handle fast. No attachment. No explanation. No documentation. HR had responded. We need performance basis, Dalton replied. I will address verbally. Rebecca leaned back in her chair when she read that line. Address verbally, meaning no written trail. Meaning bypass process, meaning personal decision. She forwarded the chain to compliance. Then she checked one more thing. The compliance report from 2 weeks earlier, the one Ethan had refused to alter. Dalton had responded to Ethan's refusal with a single sentence. We will discuss your alignment going forward. Alignment. Corporate code for obedience. Now, that sentence looked less like feedback and more like warning. Rebecca compiled the timeline. Compliance disagreement, email pressure, public termination, no documentation, active contract renewal, witnesses present, recording preserved. In legal terms, that pattern had a name. Retaliation. She met with senior legal that evening. They did not discuss Ethan first. They discussed exposure, public termination without basis, potential retaliation linked to compliance reporting, digital trail proving management bypassed HR procedure, recording confirming public reputational harm. That was not an HR issue, that was corporate liability, and corporations treat liability like fire. They isolate the source. The next morning, Dalton's badge access was downgraded, not revoked. Downgraded. That was the first formal step before removal. He was told to work from home pending internal review. No announcement, no explanation. But his calendar emptied. Meetings canceled. Assistants reassigned. Silence at that level is louder than shouting. Meanwhile, Ethan received an email from Rebecca. We would like to meet again tomorrow. Bring any documentation related to the compliance report discussion. Polite, precise. He read it twice. The center of gravity had shifted. 2 days ago, he had been the person being removed. Now, he was the key witness in an internal investigation. Not because he fought loudly, but because he stayed factual, kept records, and happened to receive a payroll renewal email at the exact wrong moment for someone else. In corporate life, timing often matters more than power. And the recording had locked the timeline in place. There was no rewriting it. No reinterpretation. Just a sequence of decisions that now belonged to legal, not management. The compliance report had seemed routine at the time. Quarterly operations metrics, processing speeds, error rates, escalation logs, the kind of document that rarely attracted attention unless numbers looked bad. 2 weeks earlier, Ethan had submitted the draft to Dalton for review. The numbers were accurate. They were also inconvenient. Processing times had increased slightly after a system update. Nothing catastrophic, nothing unusual. but not the improvement leadership had promised upper management. Dalton had called him into his office that afternoon. Close the door. Ethan remembered the blinds half closed. Dalton, standing rather than sitting. "These numbers will create questions," Dalton said. "They are the actual figures," Ethan replied. Dalton tapped the printed report with a pen. "Can we frame this as transitional variance instead? That would require altering the summary averages, which would make them inaccurate." Dalton's smile had been thin. Sometimes leadership needs clean narratives, not raw data. Ethan stayed calm. Compliance reports go to external auditors. The numbers have to match system logs. A long pause. Dalton leaned back. "We will discuss your alignment going forward." At the time, it sounded like frustration. Now, it sounded like a warning. Ethan had saved that email exchange. Not because he expected retaliation, because he saved everything related to reporting. It was habit, not strategy. When Rebecca asked for documentation, he forwarded the full thread. Original report, Dalton's request, his refusal, Dalton's alignment comment. Rebecca read it twice. Then once more. "This explains motive," she said quietly. Motive mattered. Because without motive, termination could be argued as a poor management. With motive, it became retaliation. She asked a direct question. "Did he ever reopen that conversation?" "No." "Did he assign you any performance improvement plan after?" "No." "Did anyone from HR discuss concerns with you before the meeting?" "No." Rebecca nodded. Then she showed him something unexpected. An internal audit request submitted by Dalton 3 days before the meeting. Subject: operational efficiency discrepancies. Attached notes claiming Ethan's reporting methods were causing departmental performance issues. The language was careful, not accusatory, but suggestive. Suggestive enough to justify scrutiny, not enough to justify termination. This was how retaliation often looked. Build a narrative, move quickly, remove the obstacle. But Dalton had skipped steps. He had not built the documentation. He had assumed authority was enough. Rebecca closed the file. When managers attempt to override compliance safeguards, companies take that very seriously. That sentence was not comfort, it was assessment. Because if compliance data had been altered under pressure, the company itself could face penalties. Suddenly, Ethan's refusal to change numbers was not insubordination. It was protection. Protection for the company, which made his termination attempt look even worse. Rebecca gathered the documents. "We will be interviewing other team members who worked on the report." Standard procedure. But each interview would strengthen the pattern. And patterns are what lawyers build cases on. Before he left, she added one more thing. "You did the correct thing by keeping the original data." He nodded. He had not thought of it as bravery, just process. But inside corporations, process is law, and he had followed it. Dalton had not. By the time Ethan walked back to his desk, the situation had shifted again. It was no longer about a mistaken firing. It was about an executive trying to pressure operational data. That crossed a line far beyond HR policy. That entered regulatory territory. And companies do not negotiate with regulatory risk. They eliminate it. By Thursday morning, the situation no longer felt like an internal dispute. It felt like containment. Ethan noticed it in small ways first. Melissa from HR stopped using phrases like resolution and conversation. Now she said documentation and review. Calendar invites came from legal, not HR. Compliance officers who had never spoken to him before now asked precise, structured questions. Each department was building its own record. That is what companies do when they sense exposure. They stop speaking casually. They start speaking in writing. At 10 sharp, Ethan met Rebecca again. This time, another person was in the room. Martin, senior counsel for corporate risk. Older, slower speaking. eyes that evaluated before responding. He began without introduction. We need to clarify the sequence of events surrounding your compliance report. Not your termination, your compliance report. Because now that was the center. Ethan walked through it again. Original numbers, Dalton's request, his refusal, the alignment comment. Martin asked one question. Did Mr. Dalton ever instruct you verbally to change the figures? No, that was important. Verbal pressure without written instruction is common, but without witnesses it becomes difficult to prove. Still, the email trail already established enough. Martin leaned back. We have also reviewed meeting recordings and internal communications. Ethan did not ask what they found. He did not need to. Martin continued. Based on current information, your employment status remains active and unchanged. That was the first formal confirmation. Not from HR, from legal. He nodded. Martin added, You are not under investigation. That mattered even more, because when legal departments step in, they sometimes widen the net. Ethan was not the target. He was the reference point. Rebecca slid a document across the table. We would like you to confirm the accuracy of this timeline. It listed dates, emails, meetings, system logs. Everything aligned. He signed. That signature turned his experience into official corporate record. No longer hallway rumor, no longer department gossip, documented fact. When the meeting ended, Rebecca walked him to the door. She spoke quietly. You should be aware there may be additional changes in leadership over the coming days. Careful wording. She could not say removal, she could not say termination. But the direction was clear. Back on the operations floor, something else had changed. Dalton's name had been removed from the department organizational chart. Not replaced, just blank. People notice org charts. They refresh automatically on internal portals. Blank spaces create questions. By early afternoon, Dalton's assistant packed 2 boxes from his office. No announcement, no farewell email, no explanation. That is how executive exits happen when they are not celebrations. Silently, controlled, erased from structure before erased from memory. Later that day, compliance sent a department-wide message. All reporting staff are reminded to maintain original data integrity and escalate any pressure to alter compliance documentation. That was not random, that was signal. Signal that the company was drawing a line, and that someone had crossed it. Ethan read the message twice. 2 days ago, he'd been sitting at the end of a conference table while his job disappeared in front of witnesses. Now, the entire company was being reminded to do exactly what he had done. Keep numbers honest, report pressure, do not adjust facts. He did not feel vindicated. He felt steady, because this was no longer about personal pride. It was about record, and record had weight. At 4:30, Melissa stopped by his desk, her voice softer now. There will be a department update meeting tomorrow morning. He looked at her. She nodded once. The record will be corrected. Not apology, correction, legal language, but public. Which mattered. Because public humiliation requires public repair. Otherwise, the damage stays attached. As she walked away, Ethan realized the balance had fully shifted. The company was no longer managing him. They were managing fallout. And once corporations move into fallout mode, individuals at the center of risk rarely stay in power. Dalton had acted quickly, without documentation, without process, without understanding that modern workplaces record everything. Emails, access logs, meetings, words. He had assumed authority would carry him. But authority without record collapses when record appears. Tomorrow, the department would hear the correction, and everyone who had watched the first meeting would see the second. That was not revenge. That was equilibrium. By Friday morning, the building felt like a place holding its breath. No alarms, no announcements, just a strange quiet under the surface of normal activity. Ethan noticed it in the way people avoided speculative conversations, in the way managers walked faster than usual, eyes forward, as if momentum could keep them out of trouble. At 9 sharp, the department gathered again in the same conference room. Same chairs, same table, different atmosphere. This time, Dalton was not there. Rebecca from legal stood at the front with Melissa from HR beside her. A senior vice president Ethan had only seen in company newsletters sat near the head of the table. That alone told everyone the situation had escalated far beyond a local management decision. Rebecca spoke first. There was an administrative error during Monday's meeting regarding Ethan's employment status. Administrative error. Corporate language that covered a legal wound with a neutral bandage. Ethan remains an active employee in good standing. The words were clear, deliberate, unmistakable. Several people glanced toward Ethan. Not with pity this time, with recognition. The narrative had flipped. Rebecca continued. We regret any confusion or concern this may have caused. Concern? That was as close as companies come to saying damage without admitting fault. The senior vice president spoke next. We take reporting integrity seriously and are reviewing internal processes to ensure this type of situation does not occur again. Processes, not people. But everyone in the room knew this was about more than a process. Because Dalton's chair was empty, and executive chairs do not sit empty without reason. The meeting ended quickly. No questions invited, no discussion. That is how corporations close public loops, briefly, formally, without opening new ones. Back at his desk, Ethan noticed something else. His inbox was fuller than usual, messages from coworkers. Glad this got cleared up. That was rough to watch. Let me know if you need anything. Quiet support, not loud, not dramatic, but real. Then came a different kind of message. Anonymous internal survey notification. Subject, workplace ethics and reporting confidence. That was not coincidence. When legal departments get involved, culture assessments often follow. The company was checking for other pressure points. Other managers who might have tried to bend numbers. Other employees who had stayed quiet. The investigation was widening. Around noon, Maya stopped by again. Did you hear about Dalton? He looked at her. No official announcement, she said, lowering her voice. But his calendar is gone and IT reassigned his assistant. She hesitated. People think he is not coming back. Rumors travel faster than memos. But in this case, the rumors aligned with visible changes. No meetings, no emails, no presence. For executives, disappearance is removal. Later that afternoon, compliance held a short virtual session. Mandatory attendance for reporting staff. The message was simple. All compliance data must remain unaltered. Any request to modify figures without documentation must be reported directly to compliance or legal. Clear, direct, protective. It was the kind of training that only appears after something has gone wrong. Ethan listened quietly. He was not named. But the situation had shaped the message. He felt a strange mix of emotions. Not triumph, not relief, something steadier, like watching a machine correct itself after nearly breaking. Before leaving for the day, he received one more calendar invite. Meeting Monday with corporate legal and senior operations leadership. Subject, role alignment discussion. That phrase again, alignment. But this time, it did not sound like a warning. It sounded like restructuring, the kind that happens after investigations, the kind where companies reposition people who followed the rules. Because once someone becomes part of a legal record, you cannot simply return them to the same place. They carry weight now. Visibility, protection. As Ethan shut down his computer, he glanced once more at the conference room down the hall. Monday, that room had been a stage for humiliation. Today, it had been a stage for correction. Same space, different power. He walked out of the building under a sky turning orange with late afternoon light. 2 days had changed everything. Not because he fought loudly, but because he stayed factual. Because he kept emails, because he refused to change numbers, because he happened to open a payroll message at exactly the wrong moment for someone else. Inside corporations, panic spreads quietly, not through shouting, through meetings behind closed doors, through sudden training sessions, through empty executive offices, and once panic reaches leadership level, decisions follow. The kind that end careers. The kind that rewrite org charts. The kind that make sure the mistake does not repeat. Monday would bring the next shift. And this time, Ethan would not be walking into a room alone. Monday morning did not begin with drama. It began with quiet interviews. Ethan noticed it the moment he stepped onto the floor. Conference rooms were booked all day under generic titles: process review, documentation check, operation sync. But the attendees told a different story. Compliance, legal, HR analytics. One by one, people were being called in. Not managers, staff, people who handled numbers, people who sent reports, people who had once received suggestions about how to present data. The investigation had moved past Ethan, and once investigations widen, they rarely shrink again. At 10:30, Maya messaged him. They asked me about Q2 metrics. His pulse ticked once, steady but alert. Did you answer honestly? Yes. Pause. She added. They asked if anyone ever pushed for adjustments without documentation. He knew what that meant. Pattern building. Lawyers do not just look for a single event. They look for repetition. Behavior. Signals that show a decision was not impulsive, but habitual. Just before lunch, Chris from logistics walked by his desk. They asked me about shipping delay reports last year, he said quietly. Ethan looked up. Did Dalton ever talk to you about those? Chris nodded once. Told me to classify delays as vendor-related even when internal. Did you? No. Chris gave a short breath. I thought I was just being stubborn. Now it looked different. By early afternoon, Rebecca and Martin had a list. Not accusations, observations, moments where Dalton had encouraged narrative adjustment instead of data accuracy. Never in writing, always verbal, always framed as leadership alignment. The pattern was subtle, but consistent, which is exactly how professional misconduct often hides. Ethan's case had not created the pattern. It had exposed it. Around 2 o'clock, he was called into legal again. This time, the room felt different, more formal, more final. Rebecca spoke first. We have identified multiple instances where reporting integrity was indirectly challenged. She did not use the word altered. She did not need to. Based on this, your situation appears connected to a broader issue of management pressure regarding operational data. Connected. That word made the case larger than him, Martin added. Your refusal to modify figures aligns with documented expectations under company compliance policy. In other words, he had not just been right. He had been required to do exactly what he did. Rebecca slid a printed document across the table. We would like to offer you a formal protection notice. He looked at her. What does that mean? It confirms that you raised compliance-related concerns in good faith, and that the company prohibits any form of retaliation against you. That was legal armor. It meant future actions against him would carry extra scrutiny, not a favor, a safeguard. Because once an employee becomes part of a compliance case, companies protect them to protect themselves. After the meeting, Ethan walked back through the floor slowly. He noticed people watching him differently again. Not just curiosity now, respect. Because word had spread that legal was involved, that compliance was reviewing leadership conduct, that this was no longer just about a one meeting gone wrong. It was about standards. Late in the afternoon, the final confirmation arrived. Dalton had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Administrative leave, temporary language. But in corporate reality, it often means the exit is already decided. No company leaves an executive in place once compliance risk is proven. Too dangerous, too visible, too costly. Melissa stopped by Ethan's desk near 5. Her expression looked tired. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "this is not common." He nodded. She continued, "You handled this professionally. That made a difference. That was the closest anyone from HR would come to admitting fault. Because companies do not apologize directly when lawyers are involved. They acknowledge professionalism. It serves the same function without creating liability." As Ethan packed up to leave, he thought about the chain of events. A meeting, a payroll email, a refusal to change numbers. Small moments. Routine decisions. But when combined, they revealed something bigger. A leadership culture that blurred lines when convenient. A director who believed authority outweighed record. An organization that corrected course only when forced to see the risk clearly. He did not feel victorious. He felt aware. Because the hidden pattern had not been loud. It had been quiet, persistent, accepted as normal by those who did not want to challenge it. Until one day, the wrong person tried to push the wrong employee at the wrong moment. And the system recorded everything. By the time he reached the parking lot, the sky was already fading into evening blue. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more adjustments, more quiet structural changes. But the most important shift had already happened. The story was no longer about Ethan's job. It was about the corporate integrity. And once integrity becomes the focus, companies do not protect individuals. They protect the structure. Even if that means removing the people who once controlled it. By Tuesday morning, Dalton's name no longer appeared anywhere on the internal systems. Not in the org chart. Not in the leadership directory. Not in the approval chains for operational decisions. To someone outside the company, it would look like a technical update. Inside the building, it felt like an erasure. Executives do not simply disappear. When they do, everyone understands something serious happened. There was no farewell email, no message thanking him for his leadership. No transition announcement. Just absence. And absence at that level speaks louder than any memo. Ethan noticed the first visible sign in the routine workflow. A purchase approval that normally required Dalton's sign-off was routed instead to the senior vice president who had attended Friday's correction meeting. That meant authority had officially shifted. Later that morning, Rebecca passed by Ethan's desk. She did not stop. She did not smile. But she gave a small nod. That nod meant the process had reached a point of resolution. Not legally complete, but directionally decided. At 11, Melissa from HR held short one-on-one check-ins with department staff. Not to ask about Ethan. To ask about workload distribution, project continuity, leadership stability. HR does not prepare continuity plans unless a leadership change is permanent. Around noon, a message went out from corporate communications. Effective immediately, senior operations oversight will be managed by Interim Director Lisa Grant, while we continue internal process reviews. No mention of Dalton. No explanation, no context. Just the corporate version of a closed door. Interim roles are rarely temporary. They are bridges to removal. Maya walked over to Ethan with her lunch tray. "It is official," she said quietly. He nodded. He had expected this. What surprised him was how little satisfaction he felt. The situation had moved beyond personal emotion. It was structural now. Later that afternoon, Martin from legal called him into a final review meeting. This one was shorter, more procedural. "We are closing the initial phase of review," Martin said. Initial phase. Meaning more could follow if regulators ever looked deeper. He continued. "Your cooperation and documentation were critical in establishing an accurate timeline. Again, not praise. Record. You will not be required for further interviews at this stage. at this stage. Legal language always leaves room. Before Ethan left, Martin added one more thing. Leadership transitions may create opportunities. You may be contacted regarding expanded responsibilities. That was the first hint of what might come next, because companies do not just correct mistakes. They reposition the people who expose them, not out of gratitude, out of risk management. Employees tied to compliance events become protected and often promoted. The organization does not want them leaving with stories. As Ethan walked back to his desk, he passed Dalton's old office. The door was open now. Inside, maintenance staff removed the nameplate from the wall. A blank rectangle remained where it had been. That was the final symbol. In corporations, power leaves quietly. One moment, someone commands rooms. The next, their name leaves the wall. No speech, no defense, no public explanation. Just absence. At 4:30, the senior vice president stopped by Ethan's desk. First time they had spoken directly. "I appreciate how you handled a difficult situation," he said. "We are evaluating some structural changes. I would like to talk later this week about your future here." That was corporate for advancement, but delivered cautiously, because formal offers only come after legal dust settles. Ethan thanked him. Calm, measured, not eager, not hesitant, just steady. As the day ended, the building felt lighter, not happy, just reset. Like tension had been released from a stretched wire, employees returned to normal conversations. Managers spoke without whispering. Meetings focused on work again. But everyone would remember. They would remember the meeting where someone was fired publicly. They would remember the correction. And they would remember how quickly a director disappeared once the record caught up. Power inside offices often looks permanent, until it meets documentation. Then it collapses quietly, without ceremony, without applause, without warning. The follow-up meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. Same department, same conference room, same table that had once felt like a stage for humiliation. This time, Ethan walked in without his heart racing, not because he had forgotten what happened there, but because the room no longer belonged to Dalton. It belonged to record. People were already seated when he arrived. Conversations stopped when he entered, but not in the awkward, pitying way from Monday. Now it was acknowledgement. Witnesses recognizing a story they had watched unfold in real time. At 9 o'clock sharp, Lisa Grant, the interim director, stood at the front. Her presence was steady. No paper in her hand, no forced authority. She began simply, "We need to address what occurred earlier this week." No one shifted. No one pretended not to know. She continued. An announcement was made regarding Ethan's employment that did not reflect his actual status. That is corporate phrasing for mistake. But she did not stop there. Ethan remains in his role and in good standing. "We regret the disruption and the confusion this caused." Confusion again. Still careful language. Still legally measured. But said in front of the same people who had heard the first announcement. That was what mattered. She turned slightly toward Ethan. "Thank you for maintaining professionalism during a difficult situation." There it was. Not apology, recognition, in public, which in corporate culture carries weight, because credibility inside offices depends on perception, and perception shifts when leadership publicly aligns with you instead of against you. The meeting moved on quickly after that. Agenda items, operational updates, future planning. But the room felt different. Colleagues looked at Ethan when he spoke. They listened longer. Not because he was louder, because the situation had marked him as someone who stood firm when pressure came. After the meeting, something subtle happened. Chris from logistics stopped him in the hallway. "I'm glad they said it out loud," he said. "Me too," Chris nodded. "That meeting Monday, it felt wrong. Now it feels fixed, not erased, but corrected. Maya passed by a few minutes later. You handled that like a pro. He shrugged lightly, just kept records. She smiled. Yeah, turns out that matters. It does. Inside corporations, memory is short, but documentation is long. And once documentation enters public record, reputations adjust accordingly. Later that afternoon, Ethan received an email from Corporate Communications. Subject clarification notice. It summarized the same message delivered in the meeting. Employment status correction. Commitment to procedural accuracy. It would be stored in internal archives. Permanent. Anyone searching later would find the correction alongside the original calendar invite. That is how corporate reputations are repaired. Not with emotion, with documented reversals. Around 3, Lisa stopped by his desk. I want you in a project review session next week, she said. Your operational perspective will be valuable. Perspective, another quiet shift. Before Monday, he had been a mid-level staff member. Now he was being pulled into cross-functional discussions, not because he asked, because visibility had changed. The afternoon passed normally after that. Emails, reports, routine tasks. But normal now felt different. The weight that had settled on his shoulders Monday morning was gone, not replaced with triumph, replaced with equilibrium. Because public humiliation without correction lingers. It becomes part of how people see you. But public correction restores balance. It does not erase memory. It reframes it. By the end of the day, Ethan walked past the conference room once more. Chairs pushed in neatly. Lights off. Ordinary again. But he would always remember standing there while his job vanished. And then standing again while the record was repaired. Same room. 2 completely different versions of power. One based on authority alone. One based on documentation. Authority can be loud. Documentation is quiet. But documentation wins. As he stepped into the parking lot, he realized something had shifted internally too. Not confidence in the loud sense, not pride. Clarity. He knew now that doing the right thing rarely feels dramatic in the moment. It feels routine. Like refusing to change a number. Like keeping an email. Like staying calm when embarrassed. But those small decisions create protection later. Invisible armor built from process. Monday had been humiliation. Thursday had been correction. And in between was proof that inside large systems, truth moves slowly. But once it moves, it reshapes everything around it. Tomorrow, work would continue, meetings, deadlines, projects. But his place inside the structure had changed, not because he fought, because he stood still when pressure tried to move him. And sometimes, that is enough to make an entire organization adjust course. The invitation came the following Monday morning. Subject, Strategic Operations Review. Attendees included Lisa Grant, 2 senior managers from compliance, and someone from corporate risk. That combination of departments never met for routine matters. Ethan entered the room expecting a discussion about reporting protocols. Instead, Lisa closed the door and spoke plainly. We are restructuring the operational reporting chain. He nodded, waiting. She continued, we need someone who understands systems, documentation standards, and compliance boundaries to oversee cross-department reporting accuracy. She looked at him directly. We would like you to step into that role. Not a promotion framed with excitement. A responsibility framed with necessity, which is how meaningful roles are offered in large organizations. The compliance manager spoke next. This position would act as a bridge between operations and regulatory oversight. You would ensure that data integrity concerns are surfaced early. Surfaced early, meaning they wanted someone who would speak up, someone proven not to adjust numbers under pressure. Ethan asked one question. Would this role have authority to document reporting disputes formally? Yes, Lisa answered without hesitation. That was the real offer. Authority tied to record. Protection built into the job itself. He accepted, not with a handshake, not with a smile, just a calm nod. I can do that. And just like that, the direction of his career shifted. Not upward in a flashy way, outward. Wider influence, more visibility, more responsibility. Because in corporations, trust is not given for charisma. It is given for documented integrity. 2 months later, Ethan sat at the head of a long conference table. Not as the loudest person in the room, not as the highest ranking, but as the one whose notes mattered most. The meeting was about quarterly performance reporting. Department heads presented numbers. Slide decks filled the screen. And for the first time, there was a standing agenda item titled Data Integrity Review. Ethan led that section. He asked simple questions. Where did this number come from? Is there source documentation? Has this been verified against system logs? No one pushed back. Not because he was intimidating, because the organization had changed its tolerance. The compliance review that followed Dalton's removal had triggered policy updates, documentation standards tightened. Verbal directives without written follow-up discouraged. Escalation channels clarified. The culture had shifted slightly. Not dramatic, but measurable. Later that afternoon, he passed the conference room where everything had started. The same room, the same table. Now, just another meeting space. New name on the director's office, new org chart, new reporting structure. Dalton's time at the company had already begun fading from daily conversation. That is how corporate memory works. People remember the event. But the person becomes a footnote. Ethan did not feel like a hero. He felt like a reminder. A reminder that systems protect themselves when evidence exists. That process can be slow but decisive. That staying factual under pressure has long-term effects that emotional reactions never achieve. One evening, as he shut down his computer, Maya walked by. "Big meeting today," she said. He nodded. "Yeah." She smiled. Funny how things change. He looked around the office floor. People focused on work. Managers reviewing reports. Normal. But a different kind of normal. One where numbers carried more weight. Where process had become visible. Where compliance was not just a department name but a daily consideration. All because of a moment that could have gone unnoticed. A payroll email opened at the right time. A refusal to change a figure. A public mistake caught on recording. He packed his bag and walked toward the elevator. The building lights reflected in the polished floor, quiet and steady. Monday morning, humiliation had felt like an ending. Now it looked like a pivot. Not toward revenge, not toward triumph, toward balance. Because in the end, no one applauded when Dalton left. No one cheered when the correction was made. There was no dramatic victory speech, just a subtle shift in who held authority, from those who spoke loudly to those who kept records. And in large systems, that shift is the closest thing to justice you will ever see. Ethan stepped outside into the evening air, cool and calm. Work would to continue tomorrow. Reports, meetings, deadlines. But the lesson would remain, woven quietly into the company's structure. Truth does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives as an email and waits for someone calm enough to keep it.